So here is your day at home.
My name is Harry Stern. I was born and raised here in Bloomington along with my sister Judy and my sister Sybil Mervis, who lives in Danville. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today. This was my synagogue. It has been my synagogue my entire life. I was confirmed where I'm standing right now in 1955. I was born in 1940 into a house, a gray house across the street from Oakland School. But this was certainly the center of our Jewish life and mostly the center of my family's social life. There was a very tight, I guess the inappropriate word is clique, of Jewish women and families that stuck together and did everything together, and partied together and mourned together and celebrated together. And so I have a lot of memories of being in this building. When I was here, the bima was right here, the ark was right here. This was the rabbi's office right in here. And up here was the organ. There's a pipe organ up here on that wall, and it ran on compressed air. And I can remember the minute the rabbi finished his sermon, he'd throw the switch and you could hear the compressor come on. And we had a choir of, I think, four voices, a Gentile choir that stood right here and carried the service musically. There's a piano right along there. In the center, there were wide pews, and then shorter ones up the side. There was no center aisle, there was two side aisles. The large Star of David up there, when they sold the synagogue, sold this place, moved out of it, tried to sell it in 1959, we wanted to take that with us. But the black congregation that bought this property for their use would not let us take that. So we subsequently had it replicated by the glass artists up there at the ISSCS grounds in North Normal. The congregation then was made up mostly of merchants. And some people say, what's a merchant? I hear that from time to time. What's a merchant? Well, merchants were furniture and clothing and shoe stores and shoe repair places. And what were some of the other merchants? Okay, I can remember the names of them. And then then there were a lot of Jewish doctors here in town. And then the congregation started to change in that respect. There are fewer and fewer merchants. I don't know if there's any Jewish merchants now here in Bloomington. There are certainly a few lawyers, because now the congregation seems to be made up mostly of lawyers and some state farm attorneys and professors at one of the two universities. But that's been the big change in the makeup of the congregation. My family's, both sides of my family, my mother's and my father's, came from Russia. My father's family in about 1890, my mother's family about, I think 20 years after that. And they settled first in Cincinnati and one of them settled in St. Louis. The Russians that settled in St. Louis evidently came to St. Louis following a rabbi, from what we understand. And then they accumulated enough money to get on the GM&O Railroad and come north. And one group of them had enough money to get to Springfield, and my family had enough money to buy a ticket to Bloomington. I guess evidently that's how they got here. And they had a furniture store in St. Louis, and another one in Springfield, and then another one here in Bloomington. It opened in 1905, and it closed in 1986. Other than the physical attributes that I've explained to you, I went to Sunday school here, which I didn't enjoy. We had seemingly a tradition in Moses Montefiore. My rabbi was Josephson, Rabbi Josephson, and he lived at a house about 2 blocks back of here. And I don't know whether maybe we paid him a parsonage allowance, I'm not sure. But just respectfully, we used to call him Jesus Josephson. And I was never enamored by the idea of getting up on Sunday morning and coming here to religious school. I was not bar mitzvahed. Some of my friends were. Arbitrary choice. And then the first rabbi was Ulrich Steuer and his wife, beautiful woman. They were here in the 40s. And of course they left subsequently, from what I understand. Rabbi Steuer's wife had a suicide pact, and he took the poison, she took the poison, she died, he didn't. And then I think we probably, while I was here in this synagogue, we probably went through 4 or 5 rabbis. And then that pattern has continued on Robin Hood Lane. I frankly can't remember the name of all of them that we've had. Somebody might be able to. I never wrote it down. Are there any questions you have? Yes.
Harry, how many could you seat here?
Oh, I'd say probably 80. And we had a good turnout, particularly, of course, on the high holidays. Not quite so much on Friday nights. But all the holidays were celebrated here. Sunday school was in the basement. And I think, I'm not sure, that the first food fair was in the basement here. Yeah? No? Wasn't it? All right. It was which it did start out as a sit-down luncheon, didn't it? Yes. Was it 55 years ago? Is that how long? 55 years ago. Yes.
Do you remember having a strong sense of being Reformed Jews, or we were just the Jews here in town?
Just the Jews here in town. I frankly never went to anything Reform or having to do with conservative until I went to Danville, where my sister attended, she was in a conservative congregation. And I think maybe once in my life I may have been to an Orthodox service. But we were a proud group, to be sure. And according to my father, we did suffer some anti-Semitism, which never seemingly affected me. I was certainly aware of it, but it did affect my parents and my father. They were marked as Jews at an early age, an early time in their lives. And they were definitely sensitive to it. For a matter of fact, my family in 1948 moved into a lovely home on Country Club Place. And there had never been any Jews living on Country Club Place. And Jews could not be a member of Liberty Country Club until that barrier was finally broken down, I think, by Herb Livingston, appropriately by a Livingston. And so now there's several Jewish members of Liberty Country Club. My father wouldn't go there, even after the exception was defeated or was not in effect any longer. My Uncle Sam would go. My father wouldn't go.
Harry,
Yes.
are any of your friends still living in this community from your Sunday school class?
Maybe Ned, but Ned's a couple of years younger than I am, right?
Yeah.
Yes. No. I can't think of one that is anymore. Judy, any of them that we grew up with here, still here in town?
I don't think so, but I was the only in first Jewish mayor.
Judy was the first Jewish mayor. I think you were also, were you the first Jewish employee of State Farm Insurance? That seems to be, I heard that one time when you were a lifeguard at State Farm Park.
Yes.
Anything else?
So how many members would you say there were, or families?
No, I'd say maybe 60 or 70. It was a very active, socially active congregation, Jewish congregation. And they did about everything, all the activities together as a group. Very solid.
You mean within the temple or also outside socially?
No, I mean socially within the temple congregation, family.
Like what kinds of things do you do?
Well, I mean just partying, social events.
Holidays. Holidays?
Yes, for sure.
But you were a tight-knit community.
Very much a type.
Even outside of the temple, I
Yes.
imagine.
We started an event that had never been held here. It was called the Jewish Food Fair. And it still goes on through the
Right.
synagogue. Corned beef.
Karen, did you want to read your sister's?
Oh, yes, certainly. I will. My sister had sent a little missive that I'll read to you, if I may. Remember the old MMT temple building on Prairie Street. All of my growing up years were spent in religious school at that temple. We never knew that it was unique in its architecture because we'd never been to another temple or synagogue. It had an organ and a choir of Gentiles. We didn't know any differently. It was an old German Jewish, very assimilated congregation. We had a full-time rabbi in the 1940s. The first one I remember was the lovely Rabbi Ulrich Steuer, who had escaped from Nazi Germany with his beautiful wife Edith and their 2 or 3 sons. They became friendly with their parents. Rabbi had an accent, but not much of one as I recall. A later rabbi who confirmed this in about 1950 was Rabbi Josephson. I did not establish any rapport with him. Our teachers in the Sunday school in the basement were parents of the congregation. I remember one of them, Ms. Bernstein, teaching us. The younger Dorothy, Arnie Berkowitz's father, the shoe repairman, tried once or twice to teach us Hebrew. He didn't return. All I remember of Sunday school is prolonged boredom and Joseph's coat of many colors. I don't recall learning such of anything and much of anything, and I objected to the seemingly grammatically incorrect title of the book we used, When the Jewish People Was Young. I've learned something because I grew up influenced by Jewish customs and ethics and values, but I didn't realize that till I was much older. In my Sunday school class were my cousin Jake Grossman, who was 2 months older than I and who died when he was 39, and Harold Pines and Mike Karen, who were in my grade in public school. Oh, speaking about public school, I remember going to Washington grade school and junior high school, which is still operating there. And when Christmas time came, they didn't know what to do with me or the other Jewish people. And they were singing carols, and they said, well, you don't have to sing the carols if you don't want. And then they had a Christmas pageant in the gymnasium every Christmas. And they, once again, they didn't know what to do with me. So they gave me a job. They always had a nativity scene on the stage at the gymnasium. And if you may or may not know, if you take a slide projector, don't put any slides in it, it projects a circle of light. And I sat in the center aisle at that projector, and when they had the nativity scene, I ran that slide projector with a circle of light and shined it on the head of Mary. That was my part of the Christmas pageant.
Eric, do you remember being the first Jewish family to live on Country Club Lane?
Yes, I had mentioned that. The memorable occasions were Sukkot and Purim. At Sukkot, we had a sukkah on the bima, which we dedicated with real fruits and vegetables. Probably because the Lutz family, who had a big fruit and vegetable market, were members of the congregation. They're out there right north of, across the creek from Monocle's on Main Street in Normal. Yes, right across where the Pro-Man Service League shop used to be. Then we each made a basket of fresh fruit and placed it in sukkah. I don't recall what the dispersal of the baskets was. In Purim, we read the story of Mordecai and Esther, and we all wore costumes. I especially liked dressing as Queen Esther. Dad took photographs and prizes were given. I vaguely remember lighting the menorah at Hanukkah and having a gift exchange at Sunday school. On the high holidays, we always stayed home from school. We did. We were excused. Put on our hats and gloves and attended services. We were not allowed to do our homework or later to watch television. I don't recall fasting either. Sometimes at Sunday school, we would try to play the organ so we kids could sing. That was a disaster. The entire Sunday school experience was less than enriching, less than educational, and usually downright boring. But as I mentioned, something rubbed off because I am aware that I'm trying hard to be a good Jewish woman, and she is. She's a very strong, very devoted member of a leader of the conservative congregation that finally succumbed to Danville a year or two ago. So now she and her husband go to Indianapolis for their services.
There is a museum in Danville that has artifacts from that synagogue.
All right. I was aware of that.
Yeah, we visited it the other day.
Because the Danville congregation closed, Decatur is struggling, Peoria is having a difficult time surviving. Springfield has two congregations, a conservative and a reform, and they seem to be reluctant to combine from what I understand. They probably end up having to do that, reaching some sort of accommodation. But that was never an issue here.
Harry's sister Sybil has written a book for her family mostly, is what she told me. It's called In the Middle, and she has donated a copy to the synagogue. As soon as Rabbi DeBoe gets finished with it, it will be in the library for people to check out. And it contains some wonderful photographs of growing up Jewish in Wilmington.
Oh, yes.
I don't mean this to sound irreverent, given that that was the rabbi's office,
Yes.
did they have indoor plumbing in this place? Or
Yes.
it was downstairs? I just note that the tradition of inadequate bathrooms is carried on to the new building.
Lastly, one of the other things I do in the congregation, and I might say that my form of Judaism is mitzvah, is I was the treasurer for about 15 years and on the board for about 20 years. And I did all the publications for about 15 or 20 years. And then also for the past 40 years, I've been the director of the Jewish cemetery here in Wilmington, which the best I can tell was dedicated in about 1875 when they bought an acre of land for $250 and started the cemetery. And 3 or 4 years ago, we expanded the cemetery by, we didn't quite double it, but not to 30,000 square feet at a cost of $55,000 because it was the only contiguous piece of property available. But the way the trends I see now relative to the size of the congregation and the factor of cremations, I think we have enough burial land, Jewish burial land now for the next 500 years. That's all I